Hey folks! In this video, we're taking on one of the most spectacular visual approaches on the planet, to an airport you've quite likely never heard of. So we're in northern Pakistan, among some of the most spectacular mountain peaks on the planet. Over there, just off the right side of the airplane, is Nanga Parbat, which ranks among the 10 highest peaks on planet Earth. And off in the distance are the peaks of the Karakoram mountain range, including K2, the second tallest peak on the planet. We're headed pretty close to K2 actually, to an airport called Skardu. And the visual approach to Skardu is truly among the most spectacular, challenging visual approaches. So we're currently in the FlybyWire mod for the A320neo in Microsoft Flight Simulator, which we'll be using to tackle one of the visual approaches to Skardu. And later on, we're going to hop into the WorkingTitle CJ4 to tackle another version of a visual approach into Skardu. The sim is currently paused, as you can tell, and the reason I have it paused is because we're coming up on the initial portion of this approach, and I wanted to talk through the approach procedure. So, as you might imagine, since there's really only one carrier, Pakistan International Airlines, PIA, as far as I know, that flies into this airport on a regular basis, charts for this airport are really hard to come by. And so, as far as I know, all the approach plates for this airport appear to be proprietary to the airline that flies in here. However, there are videos available from Just Planes and PIA and others, some of which I'll link to in the show notes below, that actually talk through some of the elements of this approach. In addition, what I wanted to show you was a great document I found from a site called the airlinepilots.com, which appears to show a depiction of the visual approach procedure into Skardu for ATRs at least. So I'm not quite sure if this procedure is applicable to the A320, which PIA also flies into this airport. But from what I've seen from some of the videos that I'm linking to in the show notes below, it does in fact appear that this procedure might apply to larger aircraft types as well. In either case, regardless of whether this approach is only used for certain aircraft types, it did seem like an incredibly fun approach to fly in the sim, and especially explore some of the fantastic photoreal scenery that's now available for this part of the world in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So let's talk through this route and this approach procedure here. So we're just northwest of Nanga Parbat, and we're coming up on this village or small town here called Bunji. And what we're going to do is we're just going to follow this track here that's highlighted with the yellow arrows along the Indus River Valley all the way up to Skardu Airport. So as we come up on this town of Bunji, we're just going to follow along the ridge line here. And once we get to the end of the ridge, we're going to hang a 180 and follow the Indus River here as it twists and turns and winds its way up to Skardu Airport. This document, which I'm also going to link to in the show notes below, has some additional information on things you're looking for along this approach and this routing, and the altitudes they recommend you be at. What we're going to do as we make that 180-degree turn and we come across a location that's referred to as Delta on this routing, is we're going to descend down to about flight level 175, and we're going to continue descending. And this approach routing obviously was made for an ATR, so it has a ground speed of about 200 knots here. I'm going to slow down to about green dot, which I found is relatively reasonable in terms of allowing us to maneuver relatively comfortably in this river valley as it twists and turns. And we're going to descend from this location on the map called Delta to Balal, also indicated on the routing here, from flight level 175 down to about 12,500 feet. And then we're going to continue down the river valley towards this bend in the river valley. So we're going to make an S turn here, and we're going to slow down to S speed, about 180 knots in the A320, and we'll make an S turn here, descending down to about 11,500 once we're coming into this portion of the valley that opens up to Skardu Airport and the town of Skardu itself. And once we get there, we've got a couple of options. So the first option, which I think is much more applicable to an ATR, is to follow the track that's highlighted by the red arrow here, and just fly straight in with a very, very steep descent to land on runway 14 at Skardu Airport. The other option is to follow the yellow track here, which I think is probably more suitable for an aircraft our size, and I think is also the procedure that was followed in the videos that I'm going to link to in the show notes below. And that is to fly a left traffic pattern here into Skardu Airport. So we're going to enter a left circuit here. The circuit altitude, I believe, is 9,600 feet MSL. So we're going to fly an upwind leg here at 9,600 MSL. Then we're going to turn left, flying just to the south of the runway here, before turning downwind. Once we're being the threshold there of runway 14, we're going to get gear down, set the aircraft up in landing configuration, slow down to landing speed, and we're going to continue descending as we head towards this spur here along that ridge. Once we get to that spur, we'll go ahead and start turning slightly right there to give ourselves enough maneuvering room in order to execute a 30-degree banked left-hand turn, a full 180 degrees around, to roll out and final for Skardu Airport's runway 14. After we do this, we're going to hop into WorkingTitle CJ4 and fly a variation of this approach to runway 32. So essentially, the approach procedure for runway 32 stays almost exactly the same until you get to this bend here, which is referred to as the Zulu bend on this document. The only difference is, once we get past the Zulu bend, we're then going to proceed on a right downwind, essentially, to circle to land to runway 32. So these two hills here are called the Kidney Hills, and there's two options to land on 32, I guess, depending on your aircraft weight. You can either take the orange track, which puts you on a wider track to lose altitude and speed to set up for landing configuration and land on 32, or you can take the inner yellow track. For the approach speed of the CJ4, I think the inner yellow track will work just fine. So there we go. We got our game plan. We're going to do two approaches today. We're going to do the approach to runway 14 with the left-hand circuit in the FlybyWire A320 mod, and then we're going to do the approach to runway 32 in the WorkingTitle CJ4 after. Should be a ton of fun. Alright, let's hop back in the sim. Alright folks, we're back in the flight deck. I'm going to go ahead and unpause the sim at this point. So we're currently at 18,000 feet, and we're coming up on that waypoint that I mentioned earlier called Bunji. There's that town in the valley below, and we can see that ridgeline that we saw on the map earlier. And we're going to follow that ridgeline until we get to the end of that ridge, and then we're going to execute that 180 towards a fix called Delta. Now, I don't believe, at least as far as I can tell, that these waypoints that were mentioned in that documentation earlier are actually available as, you know, 5-letter fixes that you can input into your FMS. I don't believe that's the case. I think these are just reporting, visual reporting locations, the names of towns or some other, you know, visual references along this routing into Skardu today. So there's Bunji below us. I'm going to descend down to about 17,500 very gradually here as we come up on Bunji. And this is an approach I've actually been wanting to try for a while in the sim. And I was made aware of it a long time ago, I believe, by an actual A320 pilot who flies in this part of the world, who was familiar with this approach, and he made me aware of it. Now, this is an approach I've been really interested in trying in MSFS because the scenery is just so absolutely spectacular, especially with the wonderful photorail coverage we now have for the entire planet. So I think it's just going to be absolutely amazing. Okay, descending to about 17,500 there. Okay, there is the town of Bunji that was shown on that documentation earlier. So as we overfly Bunji here, we're just going to follow this ridge off to our right until we come up on that bend down there, where the ridge line essentially stops. And we're going to make a full 180 into the river valley there that the Indus River flows through. And I'm going to slow down at this point to around 200 knots as we begin the approach here. So there's the end of the ridge there. As we come up on the end of that ridge, I'm going to go ahead and make a full 180-degree turn to the other side of the ridge, and we'll follow the river once we pick that up on the other side of the ridge. Now, this might be my first video on channel where I've flown the FlybyWire A320. I have to admit, as a big fan of the FS Labs and P3D, this particular aircraft doesn't quite hit the spot for me. But that being said, I do tremendously appreciate the amazing work that the FlybyWire team have done to make this relatively interesting and fun to fly, despite its limitations as of right now. Can't wait to see what is going to be done with it in the future as that team truly improves on the default MSFS A320 Neo. Okay, there we go. We're coming up on the end of this ridge here. So now we're going to go ahead and do that 180-degree turn to hop over to the other side of the ridge, and we'll pick up the Indus River on the other side and just follow that river all the way in to Skardu Airport. And the views the passengers have in the cabin of this approach are truly spectacular. So we're going to swap back and forth every once in a while between some of the views from inside the cabin and obviously the view from inside the flight deck as we do this approach. Okay, finishing up that 180-degree turn here, and there's the Indus River below us. And we're just going to follow this river all the way in to Skardu Airport as it twists and turns and winds its way up this valley. As you can probably tell, it's early morning, probably just a couple of hours after sunrise here in northern Pakistan. And sights are certainly absolutely beautiful. One of the things I like about the FlybyWire mod, for sure, is the coffee cup, and of course the addition of the EFB. I believe there's even an A-Cars printer that actually prints real virtual paper, which is quite impressive. Now, of course, I had to pick up the Starbucks coffee cup mod for the coffee cup from the FlybyWire team. Okay, just continuing to follow this river here, and as we come up on that location that was marked as Delta on the map earlier, what we're going to do is we're going to start that gradual descent now from 17,500 feet down to about 12,500 feet. So our ground speed right now is about 250 knots, so I'm going to increase my rate of descent just beyond that 400 feet per minute that was recommended for the ATR. But this speed, pretty close to green dot here, should be good enough to allow us to maneuver, I think, relatively safely as we descend through this valley here. Now, coming back to the coffee cup, there is no shortage, I've noticed, of fantastic skins for your coffee cup available on your Flight Sim freeware repository of choice on the web. I, of course, had to pick up the Starbucks coffee. I've been known to walk into my flying club nearly always with a cup of Starbucks coffee in my hand, so just had to get that skin for that coffee cup. Beautiful scenery here as we continue down this valley. Now this, of course, as you might imagine, is an airport that is sees a fair amount of tourists who are coming to this part of the world to take in some of the majestic scenery, potentially climb a mountain or two around here. And you can certainly see why. It's truly, truly spectacular here. Okay, up ahead, where the valley makes a turn to the right, is a location that was marked as Bilal on the map that we looked at earlier. So we want to be at about 12,500 roughly by the time we get there. Now this is a visual approach. All the altitudes are recommended, obviously, not mandatory, not required. So everything is kind of eyeballed and flown based on your judgment of what can be done safely and what the conditions are calling for. Right now the winds are actually relatively calm. We've got winds out of the southeast at about 7 knots, favoring a landing on 1-4, of course. And relatively high pressure. QNH is currently 1036. We've already put our information into the approach page earlier. Temperature was a balmy -7 degrees Celsius on the ground at Skardu, which kind of makes sense for this sort of high elevation airport in the wintertime in northern Pakistan. And once again, these views are truly spectacular. Just absolutely amazing. View from the other side of the cabin there. Now I have noticed those terrain artifacts where you appear to have patches, sometimes lines of water in the terrain are still unfortunately there, despite the most recent update, which included some really cool stuff for the UK from MSFS. Despite that, some of these artifacts still certainly seem to be prevalent in the scenery, which is kind of unfortunate. But that being said, still truly spectacular. Okay, we're going to continue following the river below us. Look at that. That is truly spectacular. You got all these little towns and settlements that kind of dot the landscape below us along the river valley. Truly spectacular. Okay, there's that bend to the right up ahead. Technically it's a bend to the south in this river. That's what was marked as Bilal on the documentation that we looked at earlier. So we're just going to aim to be roughly around 12,500 as we come up on that bend in the river. Some light chop here. Kind of makes sense given mountainous terrain we're flying through. So there's Bilal there. As we make that right, we're going to come up on what was marked as Zulu Bend on the documentation earlier. And that's where we do that S-turn into the valley that opens up to Skardu. Once again, just absolutely spectacular scenery. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and inhibit the GPWS and terrain alerts there as we start the intermediate to final portion of this approach here. So we're going to continue turning right here, just continuing to follow that river. And right up ahead of us is what was marked as a Zulu Bend in the documentation. This is where we're going to make that S-turn. Okay, at this point I'm going to go ahead and just slow down to S speed. Let's get flaps 1 out. And I'm going to level off at about 12,500 feet as I come up on Zulu Bend. Once I'm in the bend itself, I can descend down to about 11,500 as I roll out of the S-turn into the valley it opens up on the other side of the bend. I'm going to arm the ground spoilers there just so I don't forget later. And there we go. There's the valley it opens up on the other side of the Zulu Bend here. Truly spectacular. This is just utterly astoundingly spectacular. Honestly, the first time I did this approach and followed the approach procedure that I found in that document, I was just absolutely blown away and astounded by just how amazing the scenery looked and just how spectacular this approach is. It's not quite as technically challenging, this approach, as Paro, of course, but when it comes to sights, I gotta tell you, I think, quite frankly, that this approach may have Paro beat. It's truly spectacular, especially given this river valley that you're following for about 40 miles until you get to the airport. Okay, rolling out of the Zulu Bend there in that S-turn, and there's the valley that includes Skardu Airport and the town of Skardu sprawled out in front of us. Just truly spectacular. And at this point we're going to continue descending down to the circuit altitude that we talked about earlier. That was listed on a chart that was shown in the Jet Planes video that I'm going to link to in the show notes below. Circuit altitude, I believe, is 9,600 feet MSL. So I'm going to descend down at 9,600 feet here. I've set my auto brake to low there. It's a pretty long runway here. Runway 1432 at Skardu, 12,000 feet long, plenty long. So I think auto brake low should be sufficient for us in the Neo. Now, of course, water masking is not available for this part of the MSFS world, but in reality, I believe this isn't really the lake that it appears to be. This in reality is just a lot of gravel and silt. So there's the gravel bars and silt that is accumulated from the river, it doesn't really look like a lake in real life the way it appears in MSFS by default. Still truly spectacular nonetheless. Okay, continuing to descend down to circuit altitude of 9,600 feet here. Once again, we're going to fly an upwind here until we get to just south of the airfield, and then we're going to hang a left. We'll fly a crosswind, then make a downwind. We'll fly the downwind until we get to that spur right there. And once we get to this little opening here, what we're going to do is hang a slight right to take advantage of that extra maneuvering room, to give ourselves some room to maneuver to make that full turn all the way back to roll out and final for runway 14 over there. Going to be truly spectacular, this approach. Okay, I'm going to slow down to about 170 knots at this point. Continuing to descend down to what was listed as the circuit altitude of 9,600 feet on that chart in the Jet Planes video. And I'm going to get flaps 2 at this point as well. But holy cow, look at this approach. Truly spectacular. The view from the cabin never fails to amaze. And the view from the other side is truly astounding. Look at that. Okay, coming up on traffic pattern altitude here of 9,600. Just going to continue descending. There's runway 1432 there. As we come up on the beam point for the threshold of 3.2, I'm going to start that crosswind turn here. Okay, there's 9,600 feet. I'm going to start leveling off here. And let's go ahead and start that turn, just as we come abeam the threshold there. Okay, and we'll turn all the way around, basically, to downwind for runway 14. Truly spectacular location. And if you look over there, you can see just how crazy the entrance to the circuit is, as we came in from what was referred to as Zulu Bend on the chart there. All right, let's go ahead and start, or let's go ahead and turn fully to downwind here. Gained a little bit of altitude there unintentionally. We'll descend back down to 9,600 circuit altitude. And once we're abeam the threshold for 14 on downwind here, we'll go ahead and set the aircraft up in landing configuration, get the gear down, slow to final approach speed, and get the flaps full out. Okay, there we go. On downwind there. Truly spectacular approach. So easy to get distracted by the sights too. Alright, abeam the threshold there. Let's go ahead and get landing gear down. Let's go back into manage speed mode. Let's get flaps 3, and we'll continue descending here. So there's that spur that I mentioned earlier when we were on the upwind leg. As I come up on that spur, what I'm going to do is hang a slight right there to take advantage of that extra maneuvering room over that area of flatter ground there, to give myself a little extra maneuvering room for that full turn all the way back to rollout and final. And let's go ahead and ding the folks in back. Just let them know we're ready for... let them know they need to get everything all set up there for the landing and take their seats, etc. Okay, just making that slight right turn there to take advantage of this extra maneuvering room here. And as I come up on this rising terrain up ahead, I'm going to start a full more than 180 degree turn here in a 30 degree left bank to roll out and final for runway 14. So let's start that turn now, and that's pretty cool. You can actually make out the shadow of the airplane directly in front of and below us there. That's super cool. All right, so let's go ahead and fly this here. View from inside the cabin once again. Just absolutely stunning and spectacular here. Now, I believe from the chart that you got a glimpse of in the Just Planes video, once again linked in the show notes below, you want to roll out and final somewhere between 500 and 900 feet AGL. Airport elevation is 7,300 feet, so this altitude looks pretty good. There are no Pappies and Vassies, at least in this scenery from MSFS. This is default scenery for this airport. So you're just kind of eyeballing your glide path here. This looks relatively good to me as I roll out and final, so I'm just going to adjust it in order to maintain what I think looks like a good glide angle for me to the runway there. Once again, just absolutely blown away by this approach. This is just truly spectacular. And a sim like MSFS certainly lets you fully appreciate just how amazing this approach is. There's a view from inside the cabin there. Wow. Just absolutely astounding. All right. Gonna make a few small corrections here to make sure we're fully lined up on final. There we go.
40, 30, 20, retard. 10, 5.
And there's touchdown, spoilers, reverse green. Let's get the nose wheel down and let's go ahead and slow the airplane down here. There's 70 knots, reverser stowed, and manual braking. Alright, that worked out relatively well. Now, I gotta admit, as gentle as that touchdown looked, the modeling of the fly-by-wire, not to be mistaken with the amazing work the FlybyWire mod team has done, the modeling of the fly-by-wire itself in the A320neo, I feel is a little off, and I think that's less the modding team, and that's more the default MSFS modeling of the flight dynamics in this airplane is really kind of funky. You know, I've been kind of spoiled by FS Labs and P3D, which is really the creme de la creme of A320 add-ons for flight simulation, and the handling, especially during landing and in the flare, is kind of odd. So I don't know if you noticed, if you look at the PFD here, you'll notice if I move my stick down, you'll see the little cursor moving there on the screen. You'll see the little cross hatches there moving. You may have noticed some of the more eagle-eyed among you during my flare, I actually had that relatively steady. I even, in fact, was pitching down at one point, which is not what you actually do in the A320 during a flare. What you would do is pull up, because the real fly-by-wire and the real A320 would simulate the need to pull back on the stick or the side stick during the flare by applying a slight pitch down moment during the flare, and so that's why you actually pull back on the stick. I'm sure the folks out there who are real-world Airbus pilots can explain the logic of the flare mode in the Airbus a lot better than I can. But coming from the FS Labs, it was certainly kind of weird how I had to pitch down in this airplane. But besides that, I got to tell you, this was not to get off track, but this was a truly spectacular, wonderful approach. And while I am not quite ready to make the full move yet from the FS Labs to the fly-by-wire mod for the A320neo in MSFS, I certainly enjoyed flying it on this particular approach in a Skardu today. Alright folks, before we close out the video, we're going to go hop into the WorkingTitle CJ4, which I actually happen to love hand flying a lot more than this mod, as much as I like it already. We're going to hop in the WorkingTitle CJ4, and we're going to do the other runway. We're going to land on 3-2, going in that direction towards the Kidney Hills that you see over in that direction. So through the magic of video editing, we'll pick up this video again in just a hot second. Alright folks, we're in the WorkingTitle CJ4 now, and we're coming up once again on the Zulu bend that we've discussed at great length in the A320 earlier. And I figured, as opposed to redoing the entire approach, which is mostly the same really, with the exception of what happens after you get past the Zulu bend, it would be much better to just pick this up as we come up on the Zulu bend and fly the other challenging circling visual approach here at Skardu Airport. So as we come up on the Zulu bend here, once again I've got the sim paused. We're below 200 knots. I'm going to go ahead and unpause the sim at this point. We're at 12,500 feet. And I've got the yaw damper engaged. The maximum flaps extension speed in this airplane is 200 knots, I believe, for flaps 15. And that's the same speed for the gear extension speed as well. So I'm going to slow down to about 180 knots here as I come up on the Zulu bend. And let's go ahead and extend flaps 15. Just to help slow ourselves down a little bit. Alright, there's flaps 15. I'm going to maintain about 180 knots here. As I come up on this bend, once again, we're going to make an S-turn. into the valley that opens up into where Skardu Airport and the town of Skardu are located. And this particular approach to 3-2 actually takes us directly over the town of Skardu, as you're going to see. Once again, truly spectacular approach. I'm sure you've heard me say spectacular, astounding, breathtaking far too often, over and over and over again during this video, and unfortunately I suspect this segment of the video is going to be more the same, and I do apologize for that. But I can't contain my excitement. This is a really, really spectacular approach. I know it's just a sim, but boy, it's really quite something. Okay, coming out the other side of the Zulu Bend there, there's the valley opening up in front of us. Once again, the Indus River below us. There's Skardu Airport, runway 14 coming into view. This time what we're going to do is we're going to stay to the east and the left of runway 14 and head almost directly towards the rightmost there of the Kidney Hills that we talked about in the document earlier. So there's one of the Kidney Hills there. That's the one I want to more or less aim for. I'm going to aim for the right flank, which I think is the western flank of that Kidney Hill over there. And the town of Skardu, I believe, is right around the bottom of that hill. And I'm going to descend here as I come out of that S-turn on the other side of the Zulu Bend. I set the sim time here just slightly earlier in the day, not too long after sunrise. Figured it would lend the approach a certain atmosphere. Truly spectacular once again. Skardu Airport, by the way, in addition to being a civilian airport that is served by PIAs, A320s, ATRs, and potentially other aircraft types, because I'm not too familiar with what PIA operates and what aircraft types beyond the ATR and the A320 fly in here. Besides being a civilian airport, Skardu also happens to be a military airbase for the Pakistani Air Force. Kind of makes sense given its location in this incredibly strategic part of the world. I'm going to bump up the speed there and just increase my rate of descent just a little bit there. And final approach is probably going to be about 115 knots for our current weight. So I'm going to aim for 115 knots. Once again, I'm going to turn off the yaw damper once I'm on short final. With these incredibly powerful engines, of course, I got to make sure that I don't let the speed get carried away over there. That can happen far too easily with these incredibly powerful engines. So I got to be super judicious and careful with my application of thrust there. Okay, there's about 180. I'm going to maintain about 180 until I'm a beam threshold for runway 32 there. So once again, 14 that we landed on is over there. Reciprocal of that is runway 32. 12,000 feet long, plenty of runway here. And once I'm at beam the threshold, I'm going to go ahead and start slowing down a bit more. I'm going to slow down to about 160 knots. That's our maximum extension speed for flaps 35. You can see F35 marked on the PFD speed tape there. Look at the glare of the sun there on the Indus River. So these are the hills that were known as the Kidney Hills, or listed as the Kidney Hills on the document that we looked at earlier. So we're going to head for the rightmost of the Kidney Hills there, which is straight up ahead. And I'm going to aim just for the very sort of like edge of the right flank of that hill there as I continue to descend. There's about 160 knots. Truly spectacular, this place. View from inside the cabin there. Wow, just stunning. Wow. Looking back inside the cabin there. Truly spectacular. Just kind of judging my height here. As I come up towards the other side of the hill here, I'm going to start that final turn all the way back to final. So there we go. Let's go ahead and start our final turn now to roll out and final. 30-degree bank should do it. We'll turn all the way around here. I can probably get the gear down at this point. Below F35 and 160 knots. Let's go and get flaps 35, and we'll slow down to our final approach speed. Truly stunning, this. I might be slightly low on profile there, so I'm going to shallow my rate of descent. There we go. There's about 115 knots. And now that I think about it, I probably could have afforded to hold off and going flaps 35 until we were actually rolled out on final there. But that's fine. This is all good. Just going to maintain about my current altitude for now until I feel like I'm back on profile. So once again, it did make sense to kind of take that the yellow track that was one of the two options that was listed on that document that we looked at earlier. There was an orange track which had us flying a much more wider track with a much wider turn to final, and then this yellow track that we're flying now that had us flying a bit closer in. And I think this was probably the right choice for the CJ4. All right, this is working out beautifully. Truly astounding views for the folks in back. You know, I have to be honest that I haven't missed the replay feature too much in MSFS, but this is one of those approaches that makes you truly miss having a replay feature in this sim. I know there's some third-party add-ons that let you do replays, but I haven't seen enough there to convince me it's worth purchasing as of right now. So I'm gonna wait until maybe a chase plane or another tool comes along, hopefully sometime in the near future for MSFS. But yaw damper off there as we come up on short final, gear down, the lock 3 green, flaps 35, speed brake 0%, yaw damper off, and I think we're ready for landing here. Over the threshold there, got our shadow off the left side of the airplane. That's beautiful. Gonna gently flare here. There we go. Touchdown. Speed brakes deployed. And let's go ahead and hop on those powerful carbon brakes here and slow ourselves down. All right, there we go, folks. Welcome back to Skardu again. You know, personally, between these two approaches, I think the approach to runway 14 might be an approach I would favor more than the approach to 32. Both of them are super challenging, super scenic, incredibly spectacular, but I think the approach to 14, requiring a little extra maneuvering, is probably my favorite of the two. Alright folks, as always, I hope you enjoyed watching this video as we backtrack here on 3.2 and take the ramp, or take the taxiway to the ramp that we were on earlier. Once again, I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I hope you give these approaches a try. Everything you're seeing in this video, besides the base sim, is completely free. So the working title mod for the CJ4 is completely free. This is default scenery, pretty astounding considering how spectacular it looks. And the FlybyWire mod for the A320neo is also completely free. So you have no excuses not to give this approach a shot. I hope you try it, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. As always, if you like this content, be sure to hit that thumbs up and consider subscribing. And I look forward to catching you in a future video. Y'all take care. Thanks again for watching. Blue skies and tailwinds. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.